Hey folks, Rob here bringing another video. This one's going to be a video on how to produce a VASL map printed out and not pull your hair out. So I saw a comment on the ASL Facebook group page, and it was somebody having frustration issues trying to print off a map at a third-party printer like Staples here in Canada, or Gecko, or whatever they call it down in the States. Business Depot third-party printer, you know what those are. They have large format printers. You can take any product to them and they'll print them out to your satisfaction. And the problem the person was having was scaling issues. So we're going to go over that in hopefully about 30 minutes. And I'm going to walk you through a couple of processes, one of which I use and another one that's going to be hopefully simpler for you guys to use. So you can print off your own VASL maps if you want to. So a couple of caveats at the beginning to get you started and to bear in mind as we go through this. First of all, in terms of legality, just remember that, of course, we're doing this because for me, I don't like overlays. I don't like taping a whole bunch of stuff to maps. Like, for example, this map here, we have a large overlay here. I don't like taping it to maps. I like to see terrain as what it is. So in this case, we have plowed fields for grain. If we have ground stone effect, I want to see a white map, that kind of stuff. So I like to make a map using the terrain effects look like what it's supposed to. Or in this case, board 1 alpha, 11 alpha, the Fortenberry boards as they're called, the double wide boards. I don't own a lot of them because I've missed out on a huge window. I don't own any of the winter offensive boards, any of the, or a lot of the third-party boards I'm missing out on. And therefore I'm missing on a lot of the action, especially when it comes to tournaments, because a lot of those tournaments use more recent scenarios, and therefore I don't have access to those boards. So if I want to contribute to those events, then I usually have to bring my own, which I don't have. And as a result, I'm usually forced to either buy those products, sometimes they're out of print, or come to VASL and print off my own maps. Now, the reason why I'm doing this, let me bring up a quick example. All right, this is one that I made up for Caslo for Dave and I to use because either it had a lot of overlays, like I said, the terrain wasn't great, or in this case, like this map over here, which is it was a PTO one, I think Buckley's Charge, I think it's called, something like that. It's a Japanese one, and the Americans were in defense, and Japanese were entering off board. So you had mud, you had PTO terrain, jungle, what have you, and or you had snow in effect for this one here, and recon attack. And I didn't like those boards, so as a result, either didn't have them. So we decided to do this. So we made up a whole bunch of maps like this. This is a poster that's 48 by 36. I took it to our local Staples, charged me about $40 a shot. I printed off 2 of them, and then Dave and I cut these out the night of the tournament, and we were able to use the ones that we played in the games that we chose to play that day. We didn't end up using all of them. This one here is actually, I messed up. I made it too big because you can see it's actually a Fortenberry board, should only be 11 inches wide by 16 high, and it's obviously not. But the other ones were used, and they were quite well received. The guys like to see terrain like this. You can see this one here. Obviously, it has a problem with the overlay, and you're going to find this problem a lot with VASL anyways. Sometimes the overlays just don't work with the other terrain fixes. Anyway, I like to see the terrain as it actually is, and that means you have to make modifications to it. And so the only way to do that is to either play VASL or print off the boards, and that's why the reason for this tutorial. So we're going to use this scenario fused at 0 as our working horse, and we're going to do just that. So now, one of the problems that people run into when they do this kind of stuff is they just don't understand scaling and how it works. Now, I'm not going to go too far into this because truthfully I don't understand a lot of it myself. I have a minimal understanding and I understand the basics of how it works. But we have a couple things to consider. One is DPI. One is your screen resolution, and which is display resolution. And the two are not necessarily the same. All right, so if you have a 4K monitor and you have a web page, you are not looking at your web page in 4K. If you didn't know that, shocker, you're not. If you're looking at a latest video game, I don't know, whatever's out there, Diablo 4 or something along those lines, that is benefiting from the latest high resolution video cards, then you're likely viewing that game in 4K, 1920, or the one in the middle there, DPI. You're probably viewing it in those high resolutions. What you're not doing is things like web pages, text, those kind of basic minimal graphics, because the amount of data that is having to transit over the network pipes is huge if that would be the case. If you were looking at this VASL page in 4K, it would just be ridiculous and the internet would slow to a crawl if that was the case. So what they do is they downsample it. When you take a screen grab, when I go like this and I go save map as a PNG image, and this pops up, all right, when this pops up and I go save map, let's give this a name here. And by the way, I'll mention this quickly. When you hit save map, save as PNG, you're going to see it come up with this VASL map.png. If you just click here and give it whatever name you want, you notice how the PNG disappears. And when you go to that file location, all you're going to see is your file name, and you realize it's not going to have an extension. You're going to freak out because you're going to see that the file actually has some weight, in this case 1.3 megabytes, but it doesn't have any file extension. Don't freak out. The file is still there. All you have to do is come into it and just give it that PNG extension, and the file will be recognized for what it is. All right, so it does exist, it just doesn't recognize the extension. I wish they would fix that in one of the later iterations. VASL, it's been bugging me for several iterations that when you go save map as PNG, when it crops up that if you just start typing it, see how it says the bottom save as type, it says all files? I wish it would default to PNG. And that way, whenever you type in something in a file name, it will always default with the extension .png. Just a minor quirk. So anybody that's involved in VASLing, I appreciate everything you guys do. Please don't take this the wrong way, but it would be nice if it just appended .png at the end of the file, because so many times I forget to do that. My bad. So the point is when you save it as a PNG, you're saving it at the screen resolution, which in this case is going to be 72 dpi. I have a 1920K monitor, which is pretty old, 5 years or so. Not a 4K, and not the, I keep forgetting the one that's in between, 1440. It's not one of those two higher end ones. And that wouldn't matter if you had a 4K, you're still going to save it at 72 dpi. All right, so if I open this image up in Photoshop, you'll see what I mean. All right, 72 dpi. Now that sounds all great and well, but for first things first, if you look at our page size, so we have a 24 by 19 inch. Okay, now again, scaling. You have to know your dimensions. A basic map geoboard is 8 inches high by 22 inches wide. All right, a double wide board, the Fortenberry boards, are 16 inches high by 11 inches wide. They're a double half board, okay, double wide. So you have to know your dimensions. So in this particular case, 1 alpha and 11 alpha are going to be 22 inches wide by 16 inches high. So clearly our pixel dimensions and our document size are not going to match. So right off the bat, you have to understand that. But let's go back to the resolution. Now this comes into play because when it comes to clarity of the image, when you want to print this out, because I took it at a zoomed out view at 72 dpi, it's going to look like shit when I print it out. And how do you know that? Because when you zoom in, you can see how pixelated it is. All right, let's bring over the Adobe viewer here. If you put this at 100, this is the view that you're going to get at 100. This is a 1-to-1 scale. So when you print this out, this is what it's going to look at. So if you look at your view, your ruler, you can see that the ruler's in centimeters, so you're going to have to forgive it. But this is about 1.5 centimeter spacing for your hexes. If you measure them out on the board, there are about, I believe, just shy of an inch on the board. So these hexes are going to be too small. You're not even going to be able to fit a 5/8 counter, or sorry, a half-inch counter, really, in one of these hexes. So it's going to be way too small. And if you zoom in any larger, of course, you're going to see the granularity of it all. So right off the bat, we know that it's shit. All right, so what we want to do is we want to make sure we get as much detail as possible. So the first thing you should do is zoom in as far as you can when you go to save your image. So when we look at our file size for this ASD FASD, we have right now we're at 1.3 meg. We want to save it, overwrite it. See how much longer it is now taken to render. And when we look at our file now, we're looking at 15.8 meg. So we've just inflated it correspondingly. All right, so if we open up that in our Photoshop, again, we're still going to be at 72 dpi, but we've gained that much more detail. So we're going to zoom in again, see how pixelated it is. We come up to 100. And this is now a true representation, a one-to-one scale of what it's going to look like on a paper. Yes, the screen looks a little bit bigger, but when it prints out on paper, you're going to see that these hexes more closely correspond to what it would look like on the map. But for reference, beside me, I have the Valor of the Guards map. All right, so you can see the difference between the two, and that's just because you zoomed in and out at 72 dpi. So you have to remember that. So that's the first thing you have to do. You have to make sure you zoom in as far as possible and save it as a PNG, making sure you put the extension PNG in. From there, you basically have two choices. The first choice is you can either use the Google PowerPoint version. I forget what it's called. I don't use it. Or I have a paid license for the Microsoft Office 365. I just use that. And I use the PowerPoint version there. So we're going to use that. And it's really quite simple here. Now, the first thing we have to do, and this is another step that people get wrong, is the first thing you should do, and this is maybe a bit old school because the newer versions kind of take this into account for you. But what you should always do is always adjust your page size before you start copying and pasting images. It used to be, not so much anymore, like I said, but it used to be that Windows has a horrible time scaling images, especially images, tables, charts, what have you, whenever you resize your document. I don't know why, but they seem to have overcome that in the recent iterations, but maybe it's just an old school practice. I always go back before I add any text. I change my slide size to make sure that I want to have, in this case, remember Fortenberry board, right? We want to have 22 inches wide. We want to have 16 inches high. Landscape orientation. And then we want to, this doesn't matter because we have no data. And this is what our board looks like. So if you look at our zoomed out view, we look at our presentation and orientation look almost alike. So right away we know that we're on the right track. All right, so now we can bring in our corrected, properly zoomed in and saved PNG file. All right, now what we have to do is to crop it, get rid of all the extra margin information. And again, you can always zoom in on this. You can see the clarity of the detail already. All right, and then just click outside the image, and you can see we've cropped everything out. Now, what I do, I just plop it in the corner, come to picture format, and here you can pick one or the other, width or the height, and you just give it the applicable dimension. All right, so in this case, we are not truly 22 by 16 because probably because of the clipping process, and again, because it's not going to be a true exact copy of your real physical board. There's always going to be some margin of error. In this case, it's only 1/4 of an inch, which is super small. So it's not going to be a huge concern, shouldn't be a huge concern. And for our purposes, we're not going to care about that. At the end of the day, it's only going to be marginal information anyways. And nobody's going to be playing that much on the edge, except for maybe setup initially. The important thing is that the interior information will be good, and your hexes will be true. They will not be skewed. Okay, so again, very coarse, quick way. save it as a PNG, open up your PowerPoint or whatever. You can do this in Paint. The problem with doing it in Paint, I found, is if you're good with math, all the power to you. I hate math, which is funny because I was a GIS analyst. But when you open up your image, you're going to have to do some rough translation to the resizing because it's done either percentage or pixels. So you're going to have to figure out what is your properties. So first of all, and Paint obviously is free with Windows. And if for you Mac users, obviously you're going to have probably better powerful tools. Again, you're going to crop it down. All right, and then from here, you can view your properties. So you know that this are your dimensions, 56 by 40. Even if you view it in pixels, you're going to have to do some math, what's the calculation to get to what you want. And then you're going to have to, at that DPI, and then you're going to have to do some calculations. So for me, I much rather use PowerPoint and or Adobe. It's just simpler. Yes, the Adobe's cost money, obviously, but if you're lucky enough to have a work laptop that you can do that kind of thing, all the power to you. Or PowerPoint, relatively free. Or there's also the Google variant, which is free, and you can do it online. So once you have your map in this kind of format, then all you got to do is just save it. Save it as a PNG, save it as a PDF, depending on what your flavor is. If you want to just print it without even bother saving it, there's also that option, and we'll cover that when we get to the printing part of it. All right. So that's a quick and dirty way of exporting it to a PowerPoint. Now, the way I do it, and because I have access to Photoshop, as you saw, is a little bit more involved. And if you also have access to Photoshop, then you probably don't even need this tutorial. But for those of you interested, basically what I do is this. First thing we do is we go to our image size. And before I do anything else, again, look at the images here, the width and the height. Obviously, this is ridiculous. But the important thing here is the resolution. So what we want to do is we want to change this resolution. We're going to double it up to 150. Now, the text size is going to blow up. Now, what you have to remember, what I've done is I've doubled the pixel count. I've not added more information. What I've done is I've taken a pixel and I've cut it into quarters. All right, so if you picture a slice of cheese, all I've done is I've cut that cheese into 4 quarters. I haven't made more cheese. All I've done is cut a slice of cheese into 4 pieces. All right, so just remember that. You're not adding more data, you're just partitioning it a little bit finer. Very important to remember. A lot of people get that confused. They think they're making more data when they're actually not. Now, when I, before I trim it to size, or excuse me, change the size, what I have to do, of course, is crop away all the information I don't want. So now when I go back to my image size, you'll see it's a much more reasonable approximation of what we want. And again, Fortenberry board, we want to do 22. We'll let the other one just default to itself because they are linked. We can also unlink them if we wanted to. Well, we're not going to. We're just going to let it automatically default and do its thing. Quickly renders. Now, when we zoom in, all right, again, it's always going to be pixelated because that's just the nature of the data. However, when we come to 100 again, we're going to see that we have a nice crisp, relatively crisp image, and the hexagonal size, if you remember from the previous example, is quite nice. You're always going to have pixelation in VASL, again, because you're looking at the 72 DPI. You're never going to get away from that. It's not going to be as fine as the detail you're going to get on the physical geoboard, but that's just the nature of the way it is. All right, once we do that, then the next step that I do, and I don't know if everybody does this, but it's a process I learned just to make files smaller or more manageable, and that is to turn it into a distilled EPS, and then from there turn that into a PDF. So what are we talking there? Acrobat Distiller is a powerful tool that will take a huge ass file and it's going to shrink the color palette down, right? So if you're looking at a typical 8-bit image, which is 3 bands, red, green, blue, 256 palette times 3 bands is 16 million colors, which is a lot. The human eye cannot distinguish 16 million colors. I don't care who you are, unless you're the Sentinel. You cannot distinguish that many colors. So understanding that, you can't parse out 50,000 shades of green, right? Distiller would take those 50,000 shades of green and condense it down to several hundred or 1,000 or whatever it is. In the process, it will shrink down the size of your file. A very coarse explanation for what happens. And in the process, it will take a multi-gigabit file and it'll shrink it down into a very manageable number. So what we do is we save our file that we've just edited. We save it as an encapsulated PostScript, which is a Photoshop function, and it's a printing script which printers use, and it changes your well, I won't get into that. All right, we're just going to change it to an EPS. And when we look at this, we'll see that the file sizes are going to be a little bit ridiculous. Quite quickly, we went from a 15 all the way up to a 40 gig file. Now when we turn this into a distilled file, courtesy of Distiller, we go from a 40 gig or 40 megabyte file to just shy of 1 meg. That's the power of Distiller. And when we open up our PDF, it looks exactly the same. You cannot distinguish 40 meg from 1 meg. All right, that's the power of Distiller. And when it comes to, not that it matters much anymore these days, uploading and downloading a megabit versus 40 megabit, depending obviously on where you are, it may or may not come into play. So you can get lots of good detail and clarity and color. Of course, there's going to be some compression involved as well. It's the part that comes with the distilling. And at the end of the day, you're still going to have quite a worthy product. So that's how we get a PDF. Now, the next step for the long way about it is, so the next step we have is printing. And again, we have two ways to do it. One is you can print at home. The other one is you can take it to a third-party printer. So the printing at home process is obviously dependent on your own supplies. Now, if you think this is a shortcut for buying the boards, you think you're going to be disillusioned. This map here at 22 by 5 3/4 is going to suck up a lot of ink. If you're talking a red, green, blue printer, you're probably looking at, I wouldn't say 1/10 of an ink cartridge. All three of them are going to be sucked up. But this is a lot of color that's going to be sucked out of your inkwells, which means you're not going to be using you're not going to get a lot of maps for your ink cartridge, which is, of course, as we know, are getting more and more expensive. So in the long run, if you're trying to circumvent the price of the map bundles, you're probably going about it the wrong way. I'd encourage you to get the map bundles. This I use because A, I don't have the maps. B, I prefer to have my overlays embedded in the maps. And C, I like my terrain to look like what it is. That's why I do this. To very custom fit it. And you can add things like victory objectives and all the rest of it. So again, this is not a designed to stick it to the man and cheat MMP of their funds or any third-party publisher. This is just a way to get this board onto the table so you can play it at the cost of ink and or paper and or money if you go the third-party printing route. All right, so let's talk about printing, because this is where another one where people get it wrong. Most printers will do 8.5 by 11, maybe 8.5 by 14. If you have the wherewithal to get the larger tabloid size, 11 by 17, or even, God forbid, a 24-inch wide printer, which has a small rolls, they do sell those, but those are, dineros. You might be better off. And you can maybe even do a full map in one run, depending obviously on what you're trying to print. But most of us are going to be stuck with 8.5 by 11. So how do we print a 22 by 16-inch map on 8.5 by 11? You have to understand scaling, all right? There are several options, and the ones that people always seem to get confused on is fit to printable area, which looks great, and or shrink to printable area, which are roughly the same thing. First of all, I should mention, Look, think about the way printers work. Do you see the gray bars on top and bottom? Every printer has this, with the exception of photo printers that have the capability of doing borderless printing. Every printer has what we call grippers, and they're basically very tight cogs, wheels, if you will, rubber wheels, and they're going to grab the printer paper as it's fed through, and they're going to spin and they're going to push the paper through as the printer head moves back and forth printing. You're going to need space on either end of the paper to do that, and that space is never going to get printed on. That space is these gray bars, which means that if you want to print a map that's 8.5 inches wide, you're always going to have a void on either end of the paper. You have to remember that when you're making your maps, in this case 16 inches wide, that if I only have paper 16 inches wide, I'm always going to have, depending on the printer, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch white space on either end of the paper. You have to remember that too. Okay, so always look for your margins on your printer settings whenever you're doing printing at home. You have to be aware of that. And you should be aware of that when you send it to a third-party printer, because at the end of the day, they're not going to care for them. It's all automated. They're going to take the file that you submit with your specifications, and they're going to hit print. If they even hit print, it's just going to be automated. It's going to spit out a file. They're going to roll it up in a tube, and they're going to give it to you. All right? So you ought to be careful with fit the printable area and shrink the printable area. And the second reason why you want to be wary of that is because this is going to skew and it's going to warp your image. I can't zoom in and view it, but if I were to be able to do so, you would probably see some warping of the hexagon as it takes your large image, a 16 by 22, and tries to jam it into an 8.5 by 11 paper. Something has to give, right? It cannot fit it in. It's going to either shrink it down or it's going to warp it somehow to get it into that area. Typically, it just shrinks it down. So you always got to be wary of those two options: fit the printable area and shrink. Neither one of those is what you want if you want to have a good map printing off. And that leaves us basically with tile large pages as your other choice. All right, so what you want to do is you always want to scale at 100, and then you just have to set your overlay. Now this is like 1,000th of an inch, which is not a lot to play with. You can go anywhere you want. You can go up to 1 inch, 1/2 inch, however you want. Just depends on how much paper gets used up. In this case, to print our map, we're going to be using 6 sheets, and we're going to have a 1 inch overlap in the process. You can add cut marks, so it gives you a nice place to cut. Again, depending on how much overlap that you want to do. So that's 1 inch is obviously too much. Let's go 0.5. See if we can get a decent page. So here we go, 6 pages. We won't put any cut marks in, and with a 1/2 inch overlap. So that'll give us 6 pages. Again, this is going to use up paper. It's going to use up inks. And there's going to be some repetitiveness because of the overlapping factor. You're going to have 1 inch of overlap along these cut lines, which just means the more ink is going to be lost from your ink wells. And it's assuming, of course, that you get everything right and you don't make any mistakes. I've sometimes printed off maps and realized, shit, I put the overlay in the wrong spot, or I forgot to add something, and those mistakes happen. So before you print, and this is another good way, do some quality control. Make sure you take a good look at your map. Make sure your victory conditions are set. Make sure your overlays and all that are set where they're supposed to be. Just save yourself some money, time, and effort, and hair pulling to make sure everything is all set before you hit print. All right. So that's printing at home. Now let's go to a third-party publisher and we'll print from there. All right, so what we're going to use here is Staples up in Canada. Again, you have something similar down in the States or Europe. You have your own versions of Business Depot, something along those lines that offers these kinds of services. You create a document in your store of choice, upload a file. Again, we'll just upload our quick file here. All right, you can see right away that we have information here. It tells us 24 by 18 inch product, which is obviously wrong. It's not the dimensions that we want. And then we have this here. Now, again, this is a VASL map that is used for personal use. I'm unsure of the legality of printing VASL. It's designed by VASL programmers to play the game for multi-man publishing. Obviously, this is only used for personal use. So I believe that I have the ability, and I have copied this, used this to produce personal products. So you have to click this in order to continue, that you have the right to copy these as required. So if you are the kind of person that's going to print these off and sell them, you're an ass, I think. But this is strictly for personal use. So just be smart about that. All right, so you upload your file, and then you're going to go create. And here is where people make probably the third mistake, is they take the default settings and they go add to cart. So one of the first things you look at here is the price. So this is going to be 19 Canadian plus taxes. We'll get to that. And we look at our finished size. So this is going to be an 18 by 24 inch product, landscape orientation. You can see that it's been filling out the borders right to the edge, which is not the way that we want it. So now, right now, we know that it's going to take our image and it's going to skew it. It's going to take our 22 by 16 inch product and it's going to skew it in both directions, which means our hexes are not going to be squared. They're going to be warped in the Y direction, and it's going to be crunched in the X direction. So what we have to do is make sure that we always select none. Very important, none. You always want to have 100% or none when it comes to reduced options, that kind of stuff. Next thing you want to do is pick a page size that approximates the paper that you want to print. So in this case, we're going to go a little bit larger for now. 30 by 20, it's a bit too big for our purposes. Let's try 18 by 24 again. Now this is where I think this is a glitch in the system, because our reduced page says none. Our page size is larger than our print or than our document is. So there should be, this is not displaying correctly, I believe. But just to be safe, what we could do is go bigger, 20 by 30. Now what you're going to see, of course, is that we've just gained an extra $8. So you could gamble with whether or not that your smaller size is correct. Again, I think this is just a glitch in the display, because the paper dimensions with none should mean that it would fit. Then we go to paper stock. Now here you have choices. As always, I always go with matte finish, because the it has to do with paper type. So gloss, you're talking photo paper. Photo paper does not absorb ink very well. The longer it stays on the paper, the more absorption happens. And depending on how you use it, if you're always going to lay it flat, if it's going to be under plexiglass, never bent, folded, then it's going to last a lot longer. The minute you start doing any of those, you're going to start seeing chips and cracks. Paint's going to start flaking off or rubbing off if you don't let it sit long enough. So I'd always recommend you go with some kind of matte finish as opposed to any kind of glossy finish. Not to mention, it just looks better. Good quality paper with a good quality ink always looks better than, I think, a glossy finish. All right. And if you have a long-term project, say you're doing a plate testing on a HASL or something, then of course you also have laminating and foam core options if you want in this case. So again, we just want paper stock, and we want to make sure our layout fits our finished size, 18 by 24, and we want none. And then you just add it to the cart. All right, we can see with taxes, we come to $21. We're on the assumption that we are going to fit our 16 by 22 product into this map, and that this is just a glitch in the way it's drawn. But again, it's a gamble, because they're not going to reprint it because of our mistake. If we make a $21 mistake, it's going to be on us. So you may want to gamble, or sorry, you may want to not gamble and just pay the extra $8 and get the higher size paper. Bearing in mind that that's the cost. So again, this is not a way to circumvent multi-man publishing's map bundle. You do this too many times, it's going to quickly add up. Again, I'm referring more or less to this as a reason for this video, because this served a purpose. It was Caslo. It was basically a one-off. We made 2 copies. It cost us $40 a shot. And by the way, that's another way to beat the system. Don't just make one map. If you're going to do this, make a large map. Again, if you have access to PowerPoint or Photoshop, quite easy. This one is a 48 by 36 inch product, and it's much easier to fit on a larger map because once you get into 20 by 30 inch range, the paper size cost isn't that much more. $30 versus $40 for an extra 2 feet by 1 foot. It's not horrible. And you're able to get more product for your dollar, as it were. So we were able to get these 8 maps printed off. Again, this bottom one here was an oopsie. This one here was never used anyways, but the other ones were used quite well. And again, they were just well received. But it was a one-off for a tournament with a lot of overlays and or maps that we didn't have access to. So that's the reason for that. So anyway, that's a relatively long video at this point. Hopefully I can shrink it down to about a half hour or so, and hopefully you've stuck with me to this point to get you from this VASL map to a tabletop playing on the same map. Hopefully that's helped solve some of the hair pulling that's going on out there. I know that George Hoytis released a video similar to this last year, I think it was, and I've seen other questions posted on ASL and the Facebook page. I think there was one on Discord as well too. So it crops up periodically. People have frustration. Remember, save as a PNG. Make sure there's a PNG extension. Zoom in as much as possible so you have as much detail as possible. Remembering it's at 72 dpi. When you bring it into your program of choice, make sure you remember scaling, and you don't want to warp and scale it incorrectly. A good rule of thumb is in PowerPoint and Photoshop is holding down the Shift key while you're scaling. It locks it in and it adjusts accordingly. And then from there, it's basically your choice. Either you're going to print off in your local printer, or you're going to take it to a third party and get them to do it there for you at the applicable cost. You're going to be going through a lot of ink doing this. I won't lie, it's very costly in the long run, and it's not going to be for every map. You just cannot sustain it unless money is no option, in which case just buy the boards if that's the case. You're just, you're wasting money at that point. If I had the money, if I was a millionaire, I'd probably just buy myself a 36-inch large format plotter and do that. But so that way all my overlays would always be on there. But obviously that's not the case. All right, so that's been long enough video. Hopefully this has been informative. Any questions or anything else you want me to cover, drop them down in the comments. If I was incorrect on anything, let me sure you point it out down below as well so I can correct it. And we'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.